Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the VIBE Daily Chat Group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
All right, welcome back to the VIBEZ Daily podcast and the Devoted series. This is day 47. I am back again and joined by my wife, Victoria, my friend, Shameeka. We are here again to just kind of continue through Numbers. We won't finish the book of Numbers this week or today. We'll be back next week to kind of work through that. But we do have 4 more chapters to get through today that we'll talk through, starting with chapter 21. And so we'll jump right in. We left off with Aaron's death and his passing. And now kind of pick up with a couple short accounts and stories before we get into a really long narrative that's kind of interesting. So we kind of start with a couple kings that are defeated here. A king in Canaan, a king in I believe it's Moab, or we get to Moab, Amorite kings. Anything that you guys thought was interesting as they're kind of going to battle with some of these other lands? Anything that just jumped out to you guys here in 21?
Yeah, verse 2 stuck out to me. This is whenever the Israelites, some of them got captured. They basically made a vow to God, saying, if you will deliver these people into our hands, we will totally destroy their cities. And then we continue on to see in verse 4, but the people grew impatient on the way and they spoke against God and against Moses. It was really much so given Pharaoh. I remember whenever Pharaoh's heart was getting hardened, there was times where he was coming back to the Lord like, oh, I've sinned, or oh Lord, if you just take this away, or talk to your God and tell him to do this. That's what it reminded me of, because they're going to God. Clearly y'all can go to God and ask him for stuff now. We're here now. Y'all couldn't ask him for things before, or send prayers to him, but just for their heart posture to be back to the complaining and being impatient. I was like, man.
Yeah, definitely think it was interesting that, like you said, as a response, once again, the Lord sent something against them, these snakes, these poisonous snakes, right? It's like, if you would just stay dedicated to the Lord, none of this would happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's again back to, I think, your point yesterday, Shameeka, we're starting to see the fulfillment of God's kind of promise that you won't see the promised land, right? We're starting to see little by little how people are kind of dying off, and it all seems to be responses to the same thing that put them in this predicament in the first place, which is complaining and not believing in God. But it does take some level of faith to look at this bronze stake that they kind of build and say that they have to look at in order to kind of recover. So there's still just this sign of God's kind of grace there as well. But we kind of go from there to, they move through this land, through Moab, kind of these little short, brief songs there that I encourage you, if you haven't got time to kind of to read through. Here in verse 18 is this brief thing where they're kind of singing. Israel sings this song to God in relation to even some of what they just went through in the middle of this, and then they come up against another people here, starting kind of in verse 21 here. As they're going through this land, it's a very similar encounter to what happened with Edom. Yesterday, as we read it, where they're trying to get permission to go through this land. So, anything that's just the last half of 21 here that you guys thought was interesting?
I think it's interesting that like they are defeating all of these lands, conquering these cities, but they're not residing in them.
Right.
Like they don't stay there. They just keep moving. And so I'm just like, okay, so they just like conquering places but not capturing them for themselves. Because I know like the Lord just probably this pillar and this cloud just keeps getting up and moving again. Because like, nope, this isn't what I have for you. It's like, don't get comfortable to reside here. Like, I'm gonna keep moving you around. So I think it probably is disheartening knowing that like I just conquered this land. This is probably some great cities, some great infrastructure, like some places that we can move in and settle and be comfortable. But yet the Lord's not allowing us to settle. Like He keeps moving us. Right.
Yeah, but I think it's also important to keep in mind, like, when God, to your point before, when God promised this land, the Canaanite land that they would have, He did say He would drive out these people as well, right? So, like, it's not just the Canaanites that ultimately will be conquered, but He said He would drive out the Amorites and the Amalekites, and the, whatever other ites we got out there, right? Like He said He would drive them out. And so we're also starting to see some of that take place, that although they haven't entered that promised land, they're starting to clear out some of that land around, Canaan, in the process. And so like I just think it's interesting because God, they're in this wilderness as a punishment, but God is still using their time in the wilderness to fulfill His purpose. Right? Like, it's not like they're just idle for 40 years and just waiting for somebody else to do something. God's like, no, I'm still going to use you to fulfill my purpose, and you're going to clear the way for the people who are coming after you that I'm giving this promise to, right? Like, I just love that He doesn't just let them off the hook and just say, well, you don't get the promise, so you also ain't got to do any work. Like, no, you still going to put in some work, and you're going to clear these lands, and there is no idle. You're not just going to sit here for the next 30 something years. You're going to put in some work and do some things as well.
That's good. That's a good point.
Especially because the people fighting are the people who are about to die, like you said. Like, they're the 20 and ups. Like, and those are the ones who are registered for war.
Yeah.
Good. That's dope.
Yeah. The ones that's ultimately going to die off, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we get to 22, and 22 really starts a very interesting back and forth here. So we have this guy, Balaam, who I'll be honest, every time I read this, I keep trying to figure out where Balaam came from.
Yes.
Like
no Israelite.
Yeah, like, who is this guy that can speak with God and kind of on His behalf, right?
Right.
But there's this guy, Balak, who is trying to get Balaam to kind of curse the Israelites. And there's this back and forth with that and some other things. I won't go into this. Let's just look at 22 as a whole. What are some of the things that stuck out to you guys in this account of, again, this prophet, Balaam, that we're introduced to here?
Well, one, the Balak, if that's how you pronounce his name, what stuck out to me with him was that, like, he saw the Israelites and immediately his fear was the thing that caused him to want to, like, do something about it. Like, they were chilling, minding their business, but he was the one that was terrified because of the numbers, which we see a lot of that being like a threat for people. Even
like Pharaoh, right?
Back to Pharaoh in Egypt. Like, the numbers and the amount of people was scary, and so he's trying to get ahead of it and, like, do something himself as a result of that. So that's something that stuck out to me.
Yeah, and just in totality of this story, it seems like Balaam was used by God, like, in order to, like, bless the people of Israel. But you can tell that, like, in his practicing, like, the Lord is not his God. Like, it's not his only God, it seems like, because it seems like he's just too familiar with other practices where, like, this divination stuff is just stuff that he does, right? And he's just tapped into the Lord, right? But the Lord has plucked him out, right? And is using him. But like, I think it's interesting because the first thing that I saw that kind of gave me a hint of, like, oh yeah, no, he's used to this, is when the elders of Moab and Midian, and once again, Midianites, right? This is Moses' in-law folks, right?
Yeah.
They came to him with these feasts for divination in their hand, and you can just see that like he is probably used to this greed, because it's like, okay, Lord, what are you saying, God? What are you saying, God? And God gives him a word, and he's just like, well, just stay overnight and see what else the Lord has. Because like I'm just assuming that every time he gives a word for the Lord, like he gets paid.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
right?
he does.
Like
Yeah.
so it's like, okay, I gave you one word for the Lord. Thank you. Just stay overnight and see if the Lord has something else to say. And if the Lord says something else, thank you. You know, it's like it was like this like
Yeah.
greed of just like wanting more, because like he could have just left it there. It's just like the Lord said no, bye.
Yeah.
But he like brings them in and lets them stay and is entertaining this when the Lord has already spoken.
Yeah. I mean, it's clear that he is used to, again, kind of the word, or leveraging his access to God for profit.
Yes.
Right. Like that is what he's used to doing. That is what his is probably his business. So his business is let me speak on behalf of the Lord. Right. That's the reason they come. Like you said, that's the reason they come to him anyway with the money. Like they came with money because that's what they're used to doing. That's why they know to go to Balaam. But yeah, I think what I thought was interesting is that like he is like, as you said, kind of stay overnight thing. Like to me, it was almost like he's waiting, hoping God changes his mind, like says something different.
Oh, for sure.
That it can be used for.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because he's who eventually tells us that like who is God, that like God doesn't change his mind, right? Like, but he is hoping that he kind of gets that, and I think it's, I don't know. It's interesting because I feel like I get it. I think it's something that we probably do as people. Is like we gonna keep praying about the same thing, hoping God changes his mind. Like he done already told us what to do.
So did.
And what his answer is, but we don't like the answer.
Nope.
We don't want that answer.
So it's unclear.
So I don't think I heard you correctly.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna pray about this again, and I'm gonna fast on it again, and I'm gonna keep praying because maybe there's something different. Maybe you'll say something different this time.
Yep.
But it's like God's like, no, I've already told you what to do. I'm not telling you again. Like, or if you ask me again, I'm gonna tell you the same thing. I've already told you what to do, and you waiting a little bit or asking me is not gonna change my mind.
Yeah.
Well, what I thought was interesting is that this Balak guy, like, it was like he was wanting Balaam to see the Israelites from different perspectives, because it was like he would move to a different place every time. Okay, well, maybe if you see them from this angle, like it was like he was living in so much fear that he wanted his same fear to be something that like Balaam essentially like inhabited, to the point of like, okay, well, I'm seeing what you're seeing now, let me go ahead and curse them because they are a big army of people and they could probably do so much. But like you said, unfortunately, like that's not what happens. Like it's like the more he wanted them to be cursed, the more the Lord would bless them. So I thought that was interesting. And we do see that, because again, I don't know who this Balaam guy is. I don't know why I automatically thought of Bel. Like I don't know if there's any correlation. But when I saw the divination being spoken of, and this is like his job, like he be using sorcery and all that stuff, and he's getting money from it, immediately I went like, oh yeah, he has no relationship with God. Like he's not claiming God or nothing. But I felt like there was something there, because it was like the fact that God entertained a conversation with him and was going back and forth and was kind of like talking to him. And in verse 18 he says, like, he calls the Lord his God. He says the Lord my God. That was something that I was like, okay, so he has respect for the Lord and honor for him in such a way to where you're saying that he's your God. And I feel like what I love about this story is that like God ultimately is showing himself to him as well in such a way to where eventually we see that normally Balaam would have did something different. He still would have went and resorted to divination. And this is me kind of fast forwarding into verse 24, but he didn't. And I kind of like came out of this passage just kind of proud of him, of like what he would normally resort to, the bribes that would have normally got him to like go against God anyway. Like, no, his language is like, I'm only to say what the Lord says.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope so. He just encountered an angel of the Lord. Like,
And a talking donkey.
and a
And a
talking
talking
donkey,
donkey.
right? So,
Yep.
like, yeah, before we get too far past 22, like, literally he goes back and forth, you know, on his route where he wasn't supposed to go in the first place. God told him not to go. So he's on his way. And yeah, like this donkey keeps smashing him into the side of the mountain. And like, because the donkey can see this angel. And like I said, then the donkey talks, which again, the craziest thing to me is like, he seemed too casual with this conversation with the donkey
Yes,
in
he
my
did.
mind.
Yes.
Like, there
what
was
I
no
was
like,
thinking.
hey, why are you talking?
Right.
It was just like the donkey spoke and then he just spoke back.
Right.
Like, he just has this conversation, which threw me off.
Do you think that have anything to do with the divination though? Like, you know, just stuff, weird stuff like that being able to happen where they've seen magicians kind of make things talk before.
No,
Because it was very
I'm
casual.
not very familiar with divination to know what that looks like, but it is possible. But again, it just threw me off that he was just so casual with this conversation.
he was.
But yeah, like then he gets face to face with the angel of the Lord, and so I do think like that probably scared him straight in some way, right?
Yeah.
Like so that yes, when he gets before Balak or Balak or whatever his name is at this point, like when he gets before him, he's just like, nah, I'm gonna say exactly what the Lord says. Like, I just seen him. Like I literally just seen an angel of the Lord.
And I think it probably was representative of like before that encounter, like he really was not like seen in the spirit, or like he really wasn't like in this mindset or mind frame of like, I'm going to honor the Lord, I'm going to do what he says. And so like his spiritual blindness I think was very symbolic. But because you kind of mentioned this in verse 20, like God did tell him to go. So it was like he was on the path and going because God told him to, but it kind of seemed a little bit like, wait, God, like in verse 20, you just said, well, since these men have come to summon you, go with them, but do only what I tell you. And then he's on the road, and then you got this little pushback happening with the donkey. Like it did kind of seem like there was this like tug of war and tussle. But again, I think God kind of knew his heart and knew where he was, and he needed to like open his eyes so that he can be used by God.
Yeah. No, I think that's all really good. And to your point, you know, he obviously he was not seeing in the spirit because he didn't even notice the angel was in front of him until he kind of gets this encounter with this donkey. So, but it does lead him to then go and speak on behalf of God. So 23 and 24 are really just the blessings that Balaam ultimately speaks over the people of Israel. And to your point, you know, I thought it reminded me a little bit of like what Joseph says at the end of Genesis, where, you know, he reminds his brothers that like what you meant for evil, like God meant for good. Because it's like no matter what Balak or Balak his intentions were and whatever he tried to convince Balaam to do and whatever, he would move him, like you said, he was moving him to different places and locations. He keeps just trying to convince him to curse. It's like what he actually meant for evil, God ends up using for the good of the people of Israel because he speaks these blessings over the people of Israel. So I mean, anything in the blessings and kind of what he said, or even just that back and forth that jumped out to you guys as you look at 23 and 24?
Yeah, for me, I still see so much paganism for like in him and his like his conduct, because although his words are saying, you know, one thing, like he says to Balak, like, build for me 7 altars and prepare 7 bulls and 7 rams. And nowhere have we seen the Lord ask for this. And then nowhere in the instructions for how the Lord has the Israelites conduct themselves has he ever mentioned these 7 altars and these 7 bulls and 7 rams. It just seems like this is some pagan custom that he is used to, and then he's saying like, well, perhaps the Lord will come to meet with me, and it's kind of like the summoning of the gods in my mind. Like like I'm gonna do this ritual thing and offer up these things and see if the Lord will come down and speak to me, right? And so it's just like, I think it's really interesting because he does that. The Lord speaks, right, and he gives him this blessing, And then, like you said, Balak just takes him to another place, and he does it again, and the Lord speaks again. But then there's a point where like he doesn't, and the Lord shows up still. And I feel like the Lord's like making the point, like I'm not summoned. Like I don't have to just show up when you summon me. And then at some point, like I don't know if it's in chapter 24 now. I'm jumping too far ahead though. It says that the Spirit came upon Balaam, and it wasn't even after an offering, right, of any sort. And so I think it's also showing Balaam like who God is too. Yeah, because like you don't have to do all these ritual things. And at one point in chapter 24, verse 1, he said he did not go as at other times to look for omens. And omens is one of the things that the Lord had prohibited to the Israelites, and told them not to do that. Like, don't do that. Was part of the whole sorceries and witchcraft and omens and all that stuff. So you can see that he's like using these practices to get a result from the Lord, and the Lord doesn't even acknowledge the offerings. Like the Lord just says nothing at all about these offerings, but just gets to the point on the blessings, right? Like. Bless.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, because I saw that in 24, right? That he does like by the time he gets to this third one, he no longer seeks the omens, right? As he did on previous occasions, right? And I think you're right that there is this way where God is also, because again, as far as we understand, like he is not an Israelite, so he's not getting the word of Moses and the 10 Commandments and the laws. Like he doesn't understand no other gospel. He hasn't been taught this. That's again. All of what the Israelites are learning is their first time really establishing this. God is taking a pagan people and teaching them how to be holy. And so you're right, like Balaam is just going off of what he knows and he's doing it. And I love it. It's just like, because it says like, Balaam saw that it pleased the Lord to bless Israel. That's how mine starts, verse 1. It's almost like he went and like the way I see it just being silly is like he went and was like, well, let me try this. And then God spoke and told him what to do. And so he like blessed them. And he like looked and was like, oh, that was good. You like that, God? Okay. All right, let me try that again. And he like blessed him again. He was like, okay, cool. That's good. That's good. You like that. All right. So like, he was like, okay, I figured out this is what's working. This is what's working right here is me blessing the people of Israel. And so as you said, like he's starting to learn who God is and what matters to him as well in the midst of this, in a way that, separate from the way the Israelites come to know him.
I'm glad you pointed that out, because I didn't catch that. Like I thought it was his way of like, I did think that it was him trying to present a sacrifice to God because he probably saw someone do that before. When because my version says in chapter 24 verse 1, he did not resort to divination as other times. I thought he was talking about like the whole reason why he was presented by Balak or Balak or whoever, like, was because he was supposed to be performing divination and cursing the Israelites. And when they said that he didn't resort to it, I thought it was speaking on like, oh, he didn't go and curse them, or he didn't go and do what he normally did. But I can see, like you said, where for each time he kind of did this whole little ritual, how that was, in your version saying omens, I was like, oh, that does definitely bring that into context for sure.
Yeah.
Well, this doesn't make Balak happy at all. He eventually gets frustrated. If you kind of get down to 24 and verse 10, all of these promises and these blessings, doesn't kind of make him happy. And be honest, Balaam kind of doubles down. And then goes ham on just like not just the blessings for the Israelites, but also predicting and telling not just the Moabites, but also the Amalekites and all these others, like, this is what's going to happen to you guys.
Yes.
So, it was very interesting to just kind of see him. Like, I feel like, I was joking with you the other day on you kind of preaching to yourself, but I feel like he felt his help coming at chapter 24. And he's just like, I'm ready now to speak on behalf of the Lord. And not just in blessings, but also in those curses. But Yeah. Anything else that kind of stuck out with you guys? Maybe any like even specific phrases or verses kind of in some of the blessings or the curses that just jumped out to you guys?
Chapter 24, verse 17, this like prophecy of Jesus,
Yes.
right? Like this star shall come out of Jacob and the scepter shall rise out of Israel. Like, wow, the Lord is even using Balaam, like I said, a non-Israelite, to give this prophecy of this coming Messiah. I thought that was really beautiful and powerful.
Yeah. I also thought that in verse 9 where it says, may those who bless you be blessed and those who curse you be cursed. I thought that was a powerful statement to say, because ultimately Balak is the one that's trying to curse the Israelites. And I think this was something that was kind of mentioned before in the previous chapters that we read. And it might have been in Exodus, or I don't know where we read it at, but we see that, again, what he was trying to do, like, it actually got reversed on him.
Yeah.
You was better off actually leaving them alone. And now as a result you're getting cursed because you're setting out for God's people.
Yeah, I just I think that's great. Back even in 23:19, this is one that I love, that God is not a man that he might lie, or a son of man that he might change his mind. To see speak and not act, or promise and not fulfill. Like I just I love, I mean, this is in the context of him really just telling Balak, like, I can't change what God has said. Like if he said something, I'm gonna stick to it. But like I do love again, those are bars. Like that's repeatable. That's something that, you know, encouraging specifically.
Can't manipulate the Lord. And then also to kind of go back to 23, I did want to mention in verse 9 that it says, I see a people who live apart and do not consider themselves one of the nations, speaking of the Israelites. And I was like, man, as much as we been like getting on them about the rumbling and grumbling and like just the disobedience, and we kind of know the insides of what's taking place, they still were seen to outsiders as like set apart. Wholly different, set apart, different. Like they're not like any other. And I think that was encouraging to see that that they can see that, you know, clearly they're different. Like the Lord is with them, as we see, because he's over here using me to bless them. I also love in 23, verse 23, it says, there is no divination against Jacob, no evil omens against Israel. Talk about protection. Like that is weight, because you know, we don't know what people are doing on the back end of trying to, like, you know, use divination or sorcery, or like have these curses over us, yet like God is saying, like, no, they're protected from all of that. There's nothing that nobody can do in that way to come against them. I love that.
It's good. And I think kind of one of the beautiful things about all of this to me too is, like, you know, as far as we understand, at least I understand, like Balaam does not know what God has promised to the people of Israel kind of through oral tradition, right, and explanation. And so it is beautiful to me that, like, he calls out the Edomites, and he calls out, you know, the Amalekites, and he calls out all these people that, like, again, God has already declared Israel will conquer, right? But he hears this directly from the Lord. Like God literally says the same thing. Like his message does not change to Balaam compared to what it already was kind of with his people. And so I just love how consistent God is, and how consistent his truth and his word is, despite kind of who delivers it, that like he does not change in what he says. So
I also think it's not here, and I honestly I don't remember what book of the Bible it's in, but I do think it's interesting that God has Balaam killed eventually. Like he says that like Balaam has like led the Israelites to prostitution at some point. So it's like now Balaam and Balak, they go their separate ways, but at some point it seems like Balaam does interact with the Israelites at some point. And he says that like he's led them to prostitution towards like other gods or other practices or something, and like he is ordered to be killed. So I need to find it. Yeah, but
which honestly I'm not surprised, because I do feel like a lot of his speaking and his acts and his prophecy was only because he was filled with the Spirit in that moment.
yes,
I don't believe that the Spirit stayed with him.
yeah,
But it was for the purpose of God fulfilling like what he needed to fulfill. So
absolutely.
there was no, I guess that's a foreshadowing of there was really no heart change.
Yeah.
Come on, baby.
Good. Okay. Well, a solid week of reading, 24 chapters of Numbers. Good job. Congratulations on getting this far through. A couple days of reading next week to finish Numbers, and then we'll be into Deuteronomy. And man, almost done with the Book of Law, those Pentateuch, first 5 books, Torah, whatever you want to call these first 5 books of our Bible. But anyway, thank you for joining us this week. Again, pray that this was helpful in your reading, in your discovery, in your exploration of Scripture in the text. But until next week, when we'll see you, take care and God bless.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the Bible. Take good care.